Welcome to yet another episode of Game of Thrones Abridged, in which we speed through the Game of Thrones books like Sonic the Hedgehog himself, that speediest of hedgehogs, though there probably isn't that much competition. Today, we are reading Game of Thrones Catelyn II. The second Catelyn chapter. And this one begins with the words, "Of all the rooms in Winterfell's keep, Catelyn's bedchambers were the hottest." They talk about how Winterfell has these hot springs, these natural hot springs upon which Winterfell was built, which is a very useful thing to have when you have a castle in the icy, frozen north. And they talk about how Catelyn enjoys that heat. She enjoys hot baths, and she enjoys the warmth. And she also talks about the survival value of having this warmth, because of course when the deep dark winter comes, you need all the warmth you can get to survive. And Catelyn talks about her past. She talks about how this warmth reminds her of her past in Riverrun, in the Riverlands where she grew up. She was born a Tully of Riverrun, and she hung out back in the day with her sister Lysa and her brother Edmure. And she contrasts her sort of warm, happy, fun time, childish childhood with Eddard. Eddard, of course, is a Stark of the North, and he was made for the cold. The Starks are made for the cold, it says, while Catelyn prefers the warmth. So there's this difference, this duality between Catelyn and Eddard. And Ned rolls off Catelyn. They've apparently just fucked. And Eddard sort of walks around naked afterwards, and Catelyn observes that he looks sort of vulnerable standing naked like that. And yeah, they've just fucked, so Catelyn talks about how her loins still ache from the urgency of his lovemaking, because urgency is what you want in a fuck. Efficiency is what you want in a fuck. And she talks about his seed within her, and she prays that she'll get pregnant again. She says it's been 3 years since Rickon was born, and she hopes to give Eddard another son, because of course a lady's duty in this society is to make babies. And Catelyn and Ned have this argument. They discuss whether or not Ned should become Hand of the King, as King Robert has just demanded. Hand of the King, like the executive, like the Prime Minister, like the guy who does the work. And Eddard is saying, "Oh, I should refuse him," and Catelyn's saying, "No, you've got to do it because he's the fucking king. You can't refuse the king." And also, Catelyn says that kings are not like other men. She says, which is kind of cool in contrast and connection to that comment Illyrio Mopatis makes about Viserys. Remember when Illyrio says to Viserys, "Oh, kings lack the caution of common men. Kings are different to other men." And Catelyn makes a similar comment now to Eddard. There are rather a lot of kings in Game of Thrones, which of course is kind of the problem, is this confluence of kings. But one of the sort of themes or interests of Game of Thrones is about what it means to be a king and what the nature is of being a king. And of course that doesn't, that's not just relevant to these medieval societies. What it's really about is power. What does power mean? What does highly centralized power mean? What does that do to an individual? What does the responsibility mean, and how does that change someone? That's kind of one of the many questions that Game of Thrones is interested in. So Ned's like, "Oh, I don't want to be Hand of the King," and he says, he talks about his relationship with Robert and how they're very close to each other. Catelyn's arguing that, well, you haven't seen him for so long. The king is a stranger to you now. And she also, Catelyn's fearful of this whole situation. Catelyn recalls the direwolf dead in the snow, the direwolf, the mother of the direwolves who the Stark kids now have, and its death, and she's concerned about what that sort of portends. Is portends a word, as in to sort of prophesy, to foretell, whatever. Anyway, sense of impending doom. Anyway, so blah blah blah. They're arguing about this. They mention how there's a plan to marry Sansa to Prince Joffrey. Blah 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 blah. And they mention Brandon Stark, Ned's dead brother. Ned expresses almost some resentment to Brandon, because Brandon was the older brother who was sort of born to be the heir to Winterfell and born to take all the responsibilities until his untimely death, which meant that Eddard had to become, Lord of Winterfell and all that. And Ned talks about how, I never asked for this. I never asked to be Lord of Winterfell. I never asked to be King of the Hand. I never asked for all these responsibilities. I never asked to fucking take baby Jon Snow and pretend he was my bastard son. Ned has so much weight placed upon him, which ironically so many other characters strive for more power. They fight and lie and kill for more power. Ned has power heaped upon him without his consent, without his desire. Which is delicious. But so yeah, Ned has all this shit that he has to deal with he never asked for, and he almost sort of resents that, while many others do much to gain power. And that's sort of Ned's whole fucking thing. Like, his whole sort of stoic carrying out of his duties. That's kind of what defines him, He doesn't want to do half the things that he does. It's like executing Will, and executing the guy at the start of the thing. Like, he does all this stuff, not because he wants to, but because of honor and duty and promises, and he's a bound man. He's chained by this shit, It's crazy. So yeah, and Catelyn's like, well, yep, it sucks that you got all these responsibilities, but that's what you just got to do. You got to be hand of the king. And Catelyn alludes to the mother of Jon Snow, who supposedly Ned fucked while he was the husband of Catelyn, and how that sort of impacts their relationship. And then they're interrupted. A guard comes into the room and says that Maester Luwin wants to have a chat. So Maester Luwin comes in, and we are introduced to this Maester. And he's this sort of old bloke with lots of things tucked up his sleeves, and he's quite well trusted by the Starks. He seems a good bloke by most accounts. And Luwin says that a message has been left by a rider, and there's a box, a carved wooden box that contained a Myrish lens. Myr is some city far away. So there's this interesting sort of trinket, this lens, this interesting thing. And Ned's like, what the fuck do I care for a lens? What am I, a Galileo? And like, Luwin's like, yeah, well, I think there might actually be more to this, because Luwin found a secret compartment in the box, and inside is a message, and the message is written in a secret language, and there's all these levels of security and complication. I suppose these days you'd just encrypt your data, but in these days there's a lot of sort of manual ways that you had to create information security. The point is that they get a letter. They get a letter from Lysa Arryn. In the show, they just hand a piece of parchment, I believe. In the books, they have all these contrivances to sort of complicate the matter. But the point is that a message is sent by Lysa Arryn, and Catelyn reads it. And Catelyn expresses a lot of foreboding about this letter. She's like, shit, there is guilt and grief and doom contained in these parchments, my lord. Something like that, she says. But the point is that they read the letter, and the letter says, it's from Lysa Arryn, and Lysa says that Jon Arryn was murdered by the Lannisters. Now, of course, we know that the actual reality is that Jon Arryn was murdered by his wife Lysa Arryn under the orders of Littlefinger, because Littlefinger is engineering conflict between the Lannisters and the Starks in order to create chaos in the War of the Five Kings, which he uses to gain political power. That's Littlefinger's deal. But at this point, we don't know that. At this point, we're just told that the Lannisters are responsible. So we're brewing this conflict between the two houses, between these Capulets and these Montagues. Montagues, fun to say. And they talk about Lysa's character, how she is a bit wacko, but Catelyn's pretty convinced that she's serious about this. They describe King's Landing as a nest of addos. But the point is that, like, yeah, it's very, very impactful that, holy shit, there's this pretty major accusation. The Lannisters must be behind the death of Jon Arryn, which they're not, but that's what they believe at this point. And Ned's like, fuck, this is a problem. And Lewin and Catelyn sort of argue that, well, given that this heavy shit is happening, that's all the more reason to become Hand of the King, go to the south and sort this shit out. Which, of course, Ned is completely unsuited to do. He's not so good at the intrigue. He's good at handling responsibility. He's good at honor and following the rules. Not so good at all the real politic that is required to ferret out this fucking mess engineered by Littlefinger. Anyway, so Ned's like, okay, fine, I'll go to King's Landing. But he says, well, Catelyn, you have to stay here, though. I'll go south, you stay here. And Robb will eventually be the ruler, but you'll look after him till then. And we have the first mention of this phrase, there must always be a Stark in Winterfell. A lot of what's happened in these early chapters is sort of the establishment of like a mythology of Winterfell. It's like, it's got all these hot springs, and it's got all this mythological founding story with Bran the Builder, and the Starks have lived there like forever, and it's this seat of power, and they say there must always be a Stark in Winterfell, and there is this sense of like mythological, magical importance to Winterfell, which as yet has not really manifested in any particular way. But there are lots of theories about the significance of Winterfell. Everything from there is a dragon underneath it, which is responsible for the heat of the hot springs, to like the White Walkers were defeated there, and that's why it's called Winterfell. There are definitely and the crypts and like the possibilities of what's in the crypts. So there's great significance to Winterfell, is the feeling here, and we are yet to see that manifest. It'll be fascinating to see. They mention, alright, so that Starks are like, Ned mentions his intense trust for Maester Lewin, and they say like, oh yeah, and so we'll take Sansa south, and she'll do well down there, and we'll take Arya south as well, and they talk about how, Arya's going to have to learn how to be a lady down in the south. She's going to have to learn the ways of the court, and she'll have to marry someone eventually. And Catelyn makes a statement that Arya needs refinement. So it's kind of hilarious at this point to think about how Ned and Catelyn are thinking, yeah, we'll turn Arya into a proper lady, the wife of some lord, knowing that she's about to become a ninja mega assassin, ghost recon Tom Clancy any moment. And they also mentioned the enmity between Robb and Prince Joffrey, and they're suggesting that, we'll fix that by bringing everyone south, and Robb, Bran will help bridge that distance, and they'll all be mates. Joffrey and Robb and Bran will all be friends, hanging out in King's Landing. Can you imagine that? There are so many what ifs reading these early chapters. It's like in those fucking comic books. Like, you know how there are all those comic books about how, like, what if Superman was a communist, and what if Doctor Doom was the president, and all that sort of stuff. All these alternate timelines. It's fascinating to think about Game of Thrones alternate timelines. Imagine if Robb and Joffrey were best pals, BFFs, skipping through the meadows. Anyway, so they're like, all right, yep, fine, we're going to go south. But Maester Lewin says, but what of Jon Snow, my lord? And Catelyn tenses at the mention of the name, and Ned feels the anger and pulls away. And so, again, Jon Snow is this fucking shadow, this fury, this ghost that haunts Catelyn and Ned's relationship. And so Catelyn, we get some exposition about how Jon was brought back as a baby by Eddard from the war, and how Eddard claims Jon was his bastard, and how Catelyn is upset and deeply wounded by Ned's infidelity, and not only by the infidelity itself, but by the fact that Ned keeps Jon around around as his son, and Cat can never quite forgive that. They also talk about the Danes. They talk about like the Tower of Joy and all that shit, and they talk about how sort of mysterious and mystical the Danes are. We're still yet to learn more about the Danes. It is mentioned here, the whole sort of Ashara Dane thing. There is a theory that Ashara Dane is the mother of Jon Snow with Ned and all that stuff. So there's all these sort of alternate ideas and theories. But Ned says, "Never ask me about Jon," he says, cold as ice. "He's my blood. That's all you need to know." So what this is doing in the narrative, it's establishing the mystery of R plus L equals J. Who is Jon's mother and father, and what's the significance of it all? A mystery which has not yet actually been resolved. 5 books and many thousands of words and many years later in the books. In the show, of course, we have seen Lyanna Stark give birth to Jon Snow, fathered by Rhaegar Targaryen, who hopefully we'll see in season 7 anyway. So Catelyn's like really fucking butthurt about Jon, and she says, well, fuck, I don't want to deal with Jon staying here at Winterfell, so he's got to go. And so Ned's like, well, I can't take him to the south because he's a bastard and everyone's prejudiced against bastards. So Lewin's like, all right, we'll send him to the wall. And I should retract. In a previous episode, I kind of implied that Benjen was sort of the main advocate, saying that Jon should join the Watch. It's kind of... Benjen actually didn't. Benjen more sort of warned Jon against joining the Night's Watch. But here, Lewin is like, I think the solution to this problem is to send Jon to the Night's Watch. Because that way he's not in the south, he's not blah blah blah, whatever, but he's going to join the Night's Watch, is the plan. And they're talking about how, like, yeah, it kind of sucks to become the Night's Watch because it's celibate and it's hard work and it's blah blah blah. But Lewin has a line saying that, well, Jon's road joining the Night's Watch is no crueler than yours, Ned, or yours, Catelyn, which of course is true. Because Ned gets beheaded and Cat gets her throat slashed. Well, actually, admittedly, Jon gets killed as well. So all 3 of the people get killed. It's just that only Jon gets resurrected. Well, Catelyn also gets resurrected, but perhaps in a less friendly form. Man, reading this like old early chapter shit is so emotional given what we know about the characters' futures. But anyway, so yeah, they're like, all right, fine, it's decided. Ned and most of the kids will go south. Rickon and Rob and will stay, and Cat and will stay in Winterfell, and Jon will go up to join the Night's Watch. The Starks are fracturing off all over the place. And one of the last lines from Ned is that summer will end soon enough, and childhood as well, which could not be fucking truer. So much of these early chapters have had all this naivety and all this simplicity and all these like fucking petty concerns, when shit is about to get so incredibly real very soon. Heads are gonna be lopped off, wars are gonna be started, and people are gonna have more shit to worry about than their fucking needlework, if you know what I mean. So like, shit's getting real. So yeah, I think that concludes this chapter, Catelyn II, A Game of Thrones. So a lot of this was sort of just like plot movement. We've established that the Starks and the Lannisters are in tension, even though we actually know that that's sort of engineered by Littlefinger. We know that Ned's going south into the nest of vipers that is King's Landing, and shit's real, brah. And Winterfell is like this sort of mysterious, mythologically significant place. That's kind of what we learn from this chapter. We'll find out more in the next one. So thank you for listening to this. There will be more soon, I think. I'm gonna aim for releasing 1 episode a day for a bit. We'll see how that goes. If you'll like it, I'll keep doing it. But hang on in the meantime, and I'll release a new episode. So long and good night.